Hi there, this is Sherry from Canine Scentinels. We've had some people ask about how we reward the dog when they find the odor source in nosework. We've come up with a few different ways that we like to reward the dog that we find are a little bit more exciting than the dog just eating a couple of pieces of food from your hand. One of the items that we use in rewarding the dogs if they like to have food over a toy is these butainers. So this is what they look like. Butainer. The way they work is just they have a squeeze top which you can take off to fill with the treat of your choice. Lid back on, they make a shaking noise, and then to dispense the treats it's easy to squeeze them out into your hand. We like using these because they allow us to reward the dog right at source. We can toss this in the same as we would for a toy, and that helps to keep the dog's focus at source rather than turning around to see where the handler is coming in with the reward. But not all dogs are comfortable with having this thrown at them from behind. So we have also come up with another way that we like to reward dogs just by using food in the hand that we find creates a little bit more motivation and drive in the dog than if you just let them eat the couple of pieces and then they're done. So when we're rewarding the dog by hand, usually the way we'll do that is hold a couple of pieces up front, sort of pinned down with my thumb, and the other pieces are anchored in here. So this allows me to move my hand, tip it upside down, and those food pieces are all going to stay in my hand and not land on the floor. So here I've got Ping. She's already been conditioned to the food tube, so she knows that this shaking is exciting. How we start conditioning the dog to the tube is touch, get food, we can drop it, and then she gets food. And then what I like to do is make sure I have food in my hand, get her to taste this a little bit, throw it at her, and then I can instantly reward with food. Pick it up. Ah, good girl. So at this point, I'm just conditioning her that even if the food tube hits her, it's still a good thing. Ah, good girl. With some dogs, they will want to pick the food tube up on their own. Yeah, good girl. But with most dogs, especially smaller ones, we find that they're not all that interested in retrieving it, and that's totally okay. If the dog doesn't retrieve it, then the handler needs to. And I'll demonstrate how we work that with odor in just a minute. What we like to do in terms of playing with the dog is if you're not using a food tube at all, so we've got a few pieces out here. Take that out of the game. I'm going to load up each hand with a few pieces of food, and then I'm going to get things moving. Come on, get it. That's a girl. Yeah, get it. Get it. Yeah. That's, yes, girl. Good girl. And this just becomes a more exciting reward for the dog than actually just eating pieces of food from my hand. What we find is if the dog's only ever getting rewarded by eating those pieces of food at the odor source, the game quickly becomes boring for them and they start to lose their motivation and drive for the game. So what we found with some of the dogs is if you're rewarding by hand at source, just by getting that first piece in at source and then pulling the dog away and turning that food into a game, you can get a lot more interaction and motivation out of the dog, and they're that much more keen to search. So for the first search, I'm going to demonstrate with Ping how I reward by hand at source and then turn that into a game for the dog. Hide is located here in the peach drawer, and I've got about 7 or so pieces of food in my hand. It's because we're in training, we want to make sure that the dog understands that they find the hide, they get rewarded, and then it's a big game. In a trial situation, I wouldn't take 7 pieces of food and do as much of the game, just because they want you to get out of the search area. You do your reward at source, maybe 1 or 2 pieces, and then after you're outside of the search area, you can keep playing with the dog out there. So I'll bring Ping in for the first search. Go ahead. Good dog. So you can see with that, I gave her the first piece of food at the opening, so she's still being rewarded at source. And then with the second piece of food in that same hand, I called her name, whipped it away. She's already had a history of me playing that game that I showed earlier. She knows that if she follows my hand, she's going to get rewarded from that. So then we turn it into a big game, lots of movement, lots of excitement, and that helps keep her motivated to want to search. If I only just gave her 2 pieces of food, 3 pieces of food at the drawer, and then a good girl, and off we go, that's the end of the game, she's going to lose motivation for the game pretty quickly. So now I'll do a hide in the same location. I'll bring in Jenga, and I'll show you how we use the food tube. I'll do one search that shows how we do it in training, where we throw the food tube in and then turn it into a game. And then I'll do another search where I show how I would work it in a trial situation. If you throw a food tube or a toy, anything like that in a trial situation, there is a risk that you could be faulted for contaminating the search area if the item is slobbery, if the food tube opens and food spills out of it, or if in your dog chasing that item around to food or toy, if they cause damage or destruction to the search area. And we want to avoid faults in any way possible in a trial if we can do that. And so we, instead of throwing the tube in, we will just place it there and then call the dog away, same as we would with the food reward in the hand. And so that one time that we reward in a trial situation by delivering the item by hand rather than throwing it, we've got 100+ repetitions in training where the dog is not receiving that. So if they start to look back because they know the handler's coming in with the food, we can quickly fade that out again in training after the trial. So I'll bring Jenga in now. We have our food tube loaded up. Go ahead. Read it. Always want to feed from the food tube into our hand, never onto the floor, because then if we're feeding onto the floor regularly, we're going to turn our dog into a floor sniffer. They're always going to be looking for that drop treat, and that's not what we want. Good girl, good girl. So there I had one that fell out as I threw it, or went to pick it up because she had her teeth on it. And so I try and pick that up while she's not looking. And then I turn that into a game, so she's still getting it from my hand. Go ahead. So as a trial, I'm going to call alert, reward the dog. Yeah, good girl! Good girl! That's it, good. Good dog. So that's the end of our demos. You can see there's a big difference in the animation of the dog, their level of excitement, how much fun they're having by interacting with the human when they receive the reward. Much more fun than if I just hold a couple of pieces of food there, game is over. We want that reward coming in to signify to the dog that now the game is starting. You're done your work, you're done your searching, now it's playtime.